In the last couple of sections, you've heard me mention now being somewhat brutal with ourselves. And I think that this is a good point to confront some brutal facts that can negatively impact delivering your vision. So if you're a leader and you need to deliver your vision, you need to confront the brutal facts and then manage pragmatically from there. Your key leadership takeaways for this video are: business schools reward complex behavior, but simple behavior is more effective. Okay. We're going to look at how often change management efforts succeed, or conversely, how often they don't. We're going to look at the employee engagement numbers. I took the numbers from the Gallup worldwide numbers, and there it states that only 13% of employees are engaged and 87% are disengaged. And there's a portion in that of that 87% that are actively disengaged, that are actually working against the goals, aims, objectives, and vision of your organization. The US numbers, I believe, are around 32% engaged. I have a hard time accepting those numbers, having worked in both US, Europe, and Asia. It might be that just might be a cultural thing between Americans and the rest of the world, but I don't believe that it's that big of a difference between engagement numbers for Europeans as it is for Americans. We also look at in this section that flow increases your odds of success. So it doesn't matter if you're using traditional classic, change management, or agile Scrum. When you apply flow as a leadership framework above all of those, it helps them all work together and play nice, as one of our previous flow certified trainers pointed out. You're going to see we love to quote different business leaders, and we quote different books in our books. And Warren Buffett just has this beautiful quote: business schools reward difficult, complex behavior more than simple behavior. But simple behavior is more effective. And we'll talk about that when we look at the Cynefin diagram or the Stacy matrix. And when we look at those two, keep this in mind, because when you're talking about total chaos and you're going to be using completely novel practices to try to solve that, versus complex, where you're probably going to be using emerging practices, versus complicated, where you're going to be using good practice, versus simple, where you're best practice. And this is where management consultants are eating the agile coaches' lunches, because the agile coaches don't get even though it's right in front of their face, they don't seem to understand that management consultants make their money by simplifying things for organizations, where human nature is to make it overly complex, to over-engineer it. And that doesn't do any good for anybody. And that's why the whole practice of management consulting has emerged, is because really sharp people recognize that, hey, there's patterns here, and we can turn those patterns into best practices. The Agilists believe they're the ones that came up with pattern recognition. Sorry, guys, you didn't come up with it. It's been around for a long time. Even in World War II, my dad was a code breaker. He was a cryptographer. He taught us that there are patterns in everything, 6 degrees of separation, all of those cool things. And if you simplify things, you will be more effective, just like Warren Buffett says here. I'm going to share some statistics with you. 70% of all change efforts fail. And that's straight from the Association of Change Management Professionals. That was shared at one of their events in Stockholm when they were launching the chapter there about 4 or 5 years ago. 70% of all change effort fails. That means you only have barely a 1 in 3 chance of succeeding. And when you think about it, there's a lot of reasons why change efforts fail. Now, Dr. Cotter, who writes for Harvard Business Review and is a former professor and has his consulting company, he points out that the vision for change is under-communicated by a factor of 10. So, if you want to know why any change effort fails, or any project or any agile product development effort fails, I will guarantee you without exception that a good chunk of those failures are directly tied to either the inability or the neglect of an organization to communicate the need for the change, to communicate the vision for the change. If you're not communicating the vision, people are just going to go, huh? And that vision needs to answer, hey dude, what's in it for me? And if we're not answering that question at the individual level, we're going to see most of our efforts go up in smoke. That represents a lot of money in companies to have. You're spending millions and millions and millions of dollars per project and you have them fail? Wow, that's amazing. And that sort of dovetails into our next slide, where when you look at the number of people who are in an organization, this was a Gallup from 2018, and they did a global survey of employee engagement, and it was only 13% of the employees are engaged. I shouldn't be laughing because that's really sad. 87% of your employees are either disengaged, and I think the percentage that were actively, aggressively disengaged, that means that they're working against you, was somewhere up around 20%. And this is a brutal fact that the companies need to address. Now, I worked with a company here recently in the last few years where they had been doing the employee surveys, and they had been doing Agile for 6-7 years at that point in time, maybe 8 years or even 9, whatever. They were measuring their employee engagement, and they were getting numbers up around 17-18%. So they were actually about 50% above the global average. And that's an organization that was doing Agile. And but they were at the point where the Agile transformation had lost steam, and they were seeing their numbers going down as far as employee engagement and satisfaction. And so they wanted to step in and do an Agile reboot, get things going again, try to breathe some life back into the teams. And so that's what we came in to do, and we worked with them for about a half a year to get them back on track and headed the right direction. And when you look at this employee satisfaction survey, I realized that to me it felt like this works for married couples, by the way, as well. It's like your expectations versus reality. How well those align and match determine, are the people engaged? Are they disengaged, or are they actively disengaged where they're working against you? And so it almost becomes a formula where expectations minus reality equals your level of engagement or disengagement. I'm pretty certain, I haven't refined this, but I'm pretty certain that this is a formula that could work, and I'm pretty certain that there's a way that we can measure this. but it would have to be a somewhat complex algorithm to be able to pull that off, even though this looks very simple, because everybody's expectations versus their reality, that's so individual. How do you measure that? But I think even for married couples, they come into marriage. I've been married for 35 years, so I guess I might have a slight idea of what I'm talking about. You know, everybody comes into marriage wearing rose-colored glasses. You have super high expectations. Then reality hits. And this happens for every couple. And the further you slip down from 100% match, does your expectations and your reality match? The further you slide down that scale, the more disengaged or actively disengaged the couple becomes. And I'm not a therapist, but I think that this is probably a pretty good indication or a pretty good way to look at even relationships between a married couple. And if your expectations are down in that lower left corner, you could probably use it as a predictor about how long it will be before that couple gets divorced. So that's something to think about. It's a little segue from what we're actually talking about with employees, but the principles are the same. And if your expectations and your reality are not aligning, then you will disengage. You could even actively disengage. And when an employee gets to that level and they're actively working against you and actively working against the vision of the company, that's when all kinds of politics are going to erupt, and you're going to just have all kinds of difficulties keeping everything going the right direction. Here's another picture that I love sharing. In Sweden, KPMG and PMI chapter of Sweden have done a survey now for, I think, like the last 4 or 5 years. And they've been measuring the success of traditional project management. And their definition was that you achieve 80% of the scope in addition to being on time and on budget. And those three triple constraints together constitutes their definition for success. Using that as their yardstick, and that's only achieving 80% of the scope. That's not even delivering what the customer asked for, but 80% of what the customer asked for. You're talking about when they actually got the surveys correct, the first year they got 14% success rate. 86% of projects failed. That's like 1 in 7. I mean, come on, guys, really? Only 1 in 7 projects succeed? Okay, and so it went 14, 15, 16%, and then it leveled out at 16% in the 4th year. So it's like from 2015 to 2019, whenever they were doing those surveys, and I think they do those every year. So another one will be coming out this year in February, March, April, whenever it comes out. That's going to be interesting, because at the current rate of improvement, the traditionalists will take another 26 years to catch up with the guys and gals that are doing Agile and Scrum, where, according to the surveys, they're achieving a 42% success rate. So almost 3 times better the success rate using Agile and Scrum. That alone should be the entire business case of why you should never use anything remotely resembling traditional ever again. Okay, I'm not saying you can't use traditional, but if I was using traditional, I would be inserting every tool and weapon that I have from Agile into the traditional in order to try to get that traditional project up to the Agile and Scrum level of results. Now, the change management professionals, they're doing about double better. And then the Agile and Scrum is at 42%. I'm going to drop in another slide here along the way, and it's going to be an example of what we've observed of when you put flow on top of these three, what happens? How much more success do we actually achieve? The main point of flow is to help you in different levels. At the individual level, achieve autonomy, mastery, and purpose. That comes from Daniel Pink's book, Drive. And at the team level, we look at agile team facilitation. And you'll hear me talking a lot about the plate spinner at the circus. And these were pictures that we had made a number of years ago that are trying to communicate these various ideas. For agile coaching, the expectation is going to be that you can part the waters and make amazing things happen. And by the time you get to enterprise agile coaching, you better be an agile superhero capable of doing incredibly remarkable feats of agile for the organization. In this section, we looked at how simple behavior is more effective, how change management efforts don't always succeed. We looked at employee engagement numbers, and then how flow increases your odds of success. So the application of this is, how can I simplify? Will this impact engagement in a positive way for individuals, for teams, for the product development, for processes, for programs, for line management, for portfolios, all the way up through the organization? But for anyone who has teams that they're working with, will my simplification efforts help my teams be more successful? If not, why not? You need to think about that. And in Flow, we have the ways to make that happen.